In the vast, sweeping landscapes of the north, from the rugged peaks of the Rockies to the ancient shores of the Atlantic, a profound and silent change has been taking place. Here, where the wind whispers through endless forests and the call of the loon echoes across pristine lakes, the intricate tapestry of daily life has begun to reweave itself. The familiar rhythms, once deeply intertwined with the pulse of a southern neighbor, have started to shift, subtly at first, then with a gathering, undeniable momentum. It is a story not of grand pronouncements or overt conflict, but of quiet decisions made in millions of homes, a collective turning inward. This transformation is visible not in dramatic upheavals, but in the small, everyday details. It can be seen in the labels on the shelves, the logos on the streets, and the hum of machinery that now carries a different tune. It is a testament to a deep-seated resilience, a quiet determination that has long defined the character of this land and its people. The world we thought we knew, the one of seamless borders and shared cultures, has revealed a surprising fragility. What follows is an exploration of this remarkable phenomenon, a journey into the heart of a nation quietly redefining its identity, one choice at a time. We will witness how the once ubiquitous symbols of a global superpower began to fade, replaced by something new, something homegrown. And in this story, there are moments of profound surprise, revelations that challenge our understanding of loyalty, community, and the powerful unseen currents that shape our world. The full extent of this change is something few could have predicted. There was a time, not so long ago, when the sound of summer was the unmistakable hiss of a can being opened, releasing a sugary mist that hung in the air at picnics and gatherings across the nation. The vibrant reds and blues of American soft drink corporations were a constant, a colorful backdrop to life itself. They filled refrigerators in every province, their logos emblazoned on vending machines from St. John's to Victoria, a seemingly permanent fixture in the Canadian diet and culture. These beverages were more than just liquid refreshment. They were symbols of a shared continental experience, advertised during globally broadcast sporting events and blockbuster films. Generations grew up with their jingles, their celebrity endorsements, their promise of happiness in a bottle. The sight of a delivery truck laden with crates of these iconic brands was as common and unremarkable as the changing of the seasons. It was a river of sweetness that flowed north, seemingly inexhaustible. But rivers can change course. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. A space would appear on a convenience store shelf, then another. The once dominant displays at the ends of grocery aisles started to shrink, their territory encroached upon by unfamiliar labels. These new contenders spoke of local ingredients: birch syrup from Quebec, Saskatoon berries from the prairies, wild cherries from British Columbia. They were packaged with a different aesthetic, one that spoke of craft, of place, of home. The shift was not orchestrated by a grand decree, but by a million quiet choices. A hand reaching for a glass bottle of locally brewed ginger ale instead of a plastic 2-liter of cola. A cafe owner deciding to stock a line of artisanal sodas from a nearby town. The change was a grassroots phenomenon, a collective thirst for something different, something that tasted not of a globalized formula, but of the very land on which it was consumed. And so, the once mighty giants found their dominance eroding. The vibrant logos began to feel like relics of a bygone era, their cheerful familiarity replaced by a sense of nostalgia for a world that was rapidly fading. The fizz that had once defined a continent's shared taste was slowly, quietly, going flat, replaced by the more subtle and varied flavors of a nation rediscovering its own palate. The golden arches, the smiling kernels, the crowns of burger royalty, These were once the beacons of the Canadian highway, the reliable landmarks of every town and city. For decades, they represented more than just a quick meal. They were cultural outposts, familiar havens of consistency in a rapidly changing world. Families celebrated birthdays under their fluorescent lights, and teenagers gathered in their parking lots, marking the rites of passage of North American youth. Their presence was a given, an integral part of the architectural and social landscape. The business model was one of unstoppable growth. New franchises sprang up with relentless regularity, their standardized menus and efficient service becoming a cornerstone of the modern diet. The smell of frying potatoes and grilling meat became synonymous with convenience, a scent that drifted through suburban neighborhoods and urban centers alike. These chains were not just businesses, they were institutions woven into the very fabric of community life, sponsoring local sports teams and providing first jobs for countless young Canadians. But a strange quiet began to descend. First, it was the shorter lineups at the drive-thru. Then, the for lease signs started to appear, taped to the inside of glass doors where cartoon mascots once waved. The once bustling dining rooms grew silent, the brightly colored plastic seats sitting empty. The playgrounds, once filled with the laughter of children, stood still and desolate. The decline was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, creeping emptiness, like a tide receding from a familiar shore, leaving behind an exposed and altered landscape. In their place, something new began to flourish. Vacant storefronts were reborn. Putinville, the Beaver's Den, Maple Leaf Burgers, names that were unapologetically local. These new eateries were often family-run, their menus celebrating regional ingredients and culinary traditions. The sterile uniformity of the global chain gave way to the unique character of independent ownership. The community, once a passive consumer, became an active participant, supporting its own. The shift altered the very rhythm of the community. Lunch hours were no longer a rushed transaction, but a moment to connect with a local proprietor. Dinner was no longer a standardized product, but a meal with a story. The empty arches and silent kernels now stand as monuments to a past era, reminders of a time when the nation's appetite was dictated from afar. Now, the flavor of the community is one that is cultivated from within. The great arteries of this nation, the Trans-Canada Highway stretching from coast to coast, once pulsed with a singular powerful rhythm. It was the roar of the American V8, the unmistakable silhouette of Detroit's finest creations. Pickup trucks, sedans, and SUVs, bearing the iconic badges of Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler, were the undisputed kings of the road. They were symbols of power, freedom, and the close industrial bond that linked two nations. The Canadian landscape was the grand showroom for American automotive might. These vehicles were not merely modes of transport, they were extensions of identity. The family minivan for the school run, the rugged truck for the construction site, the sleek muscle car for the weekend cruise. Each was a character in the story of Canadian life. Dealerships, vast lots gleaming with chrome and polished steel, were prominent features of every major town. To own a car was, for most, to own a piece of the American dream, assembled and sold just a stone's throw from home. But a new sound began to emerge on the asphalt. It started as a whisper, a low hum that was easy to dismiss. It was the sound of electric motors, of engines designed and built not in Michigan, but in Ontario and Quebec. The familiar rumble of the internal combustion engine began to be punctuated by this new, quieter presence. On city streets and rural highways, the visual dominance of the American brands began to be challenged by new shapes, new logos, bearing names that resonated with Canadian innovation. The vast car lots, once overflowing with imported inventory, began to look different. The rows of familiar trucks and SUVs were now interspersed with vehicles from Canadian startups and revitalized domestic plants. The change was reflected in the quiet pride of their owners. The conversation in the driveway was no longer about horsepower and engine size, but about battery range, sustainable manufacturing, and supporting a national industry. The car became a statement of a different kind of independence. Now the roads tell a different story. The echo of the once dominant V8 is fading, replaced by the quiet efficiency of a new automotive age. The endless procession of American steel has thinned, and in its place is a more diverse, more local fleet. The hum of Canadian-made vehicles is the new soundtrack of the open road, a testament to a nation that has chosen to steer its own course, forging a new path into the future. The glow of the screen, the click of the mouse, the swipe of a finger, these were, the universal gestures of the modern age, and for a long time, the tools that enabled them came from one primary source: the sleek laptops in coffee shops, the powerful smartphones in every hand, the smart speakers listening patiently in our homes. They were the products of Californian ingenuity, the celebrated icons of Silicon Valley. To participate in the digital world was to participate in an American ecosystem. These gadgets were seamlessly integrated into the fabric of our lives. They woke us up in the morning, guided us through traffic, connected us with loved ones, and entertained us in the evening. Their operating systems were the landscapes where we worked and played. Their logos a constant reassuring presence. The dependence was absolute, the innovation relentless. Each new product launch was a global event, eagerly anticipated by millions of Canadians who queued to own the latest piece of this technological empire. Yet, a subtle divergence began to occur. It wasn't a sudden rejection, but a gradual exploration of alternatives. In the research hubs of Waterloo, Montreal, and Vancouver, a different kind of digital revolution was quietly brewing. New companies, born from Canadian universities and tech incubators, began to offer devices that prioritize privacy, security, and open source principles. Their designs were perhaps less flashy, their marketing less pervasive, but they offered a compelling alternative. The transformation was most visible in the small choices of daily life. A student opting for a laptop from a Canadian brand known for its robust security features. An office switching its entire software suite to a domestic provider. The smart home, once a cacophony of competing American assistants, began to harmonize around a single Canadian-developed platform. The digital tools we use to shape our world began in turn to be shaped by a distinctly Canadian ethos. Today, the digital landscape is more fragmented, more diverse. The once monolithic hold of Silicon Valley has been loosened. The glow from the screens in Canadian homes and offices now emanates from a wider array of sources, many of them homegrown. The subtle transformation in our daily gadgets reflects a larger shift, a nation choosing not to disconnect from the world, but to connect to it on its own terms, through its own technology. City streets are a runway for the everyday, a theater of identity where we broadcast who we are, or who we wish to be. For generations, the language of this theater was written in a distinct American dialect. The iconic swoosh on a pair of sneakers, the polo player embroidered on a shirt, the bold block letters spelling out a brand on a cotton hoodie. These were the universal symbols of style, aspiration, and belonging. They were worn by everyone, everywhere, a uniform of casual conformity that transcended borders. From the shopping malls of suburban Canada to the chic boutiques of its urban centers, American fashion reigned supreme. The seasonal collections, dictated by New York's Fashion Week, would arrive with predictable fanfare. Billboards towering over major intersections featured American supermodels, their gazes promising a life of glamour and cool. To be fashionable was to be fluent in the lexicon of these dominant brands, their logos serving as punctuation marks, in the statement of one's personal style. This was a powerful and seemingly unbreakable spell. But then, a curious thing began to happen. The logos once so prominent began to fade from view. It was a slow vanishing act. The swoosh was seen less frequently on the jogging path. The iconic denim patch became a rarer sight. The change was not driven by a sudden shift in high fashion, but by a quiet revolution on the streets. A conscious uncoupling from the branding that had defined a generation. The spell was breaking, not with a bang, but with the soft rustle of different fabrics. In their place, new symbols emerged. A stylized maple leaf, the silhouette of a canoe, the subtle pattern of a Hudson's Bay blanket reimagined on a modern parka. Canadian designers, long respected in niche circles, found a new mainstream audience. Pop-up shops and local artisan markets thrived. Consumers began to seek out clothing that told a different story. A story of sustainable materials, ethical production, and a connection to the landscapes and culture of their own country. The streets now display a new aesthetic. The visual shorthand of American branding has been replaced by a more nuanced and personal expression of identity. It is a style born of place, a made in Canada tag worn not just on the inside of a garment, but as a badge of honor on the outside. The most iconic logos have not disappeared entirely, but they are no longer the default. They have become part of a wider fashion vocabulary, one in which Canadians are increasingly choosing to write their own stories. The evening ritual was once a shared continental experience. As dusk settled, living rooms across Canada would light up with the familiar glow of screens. The sound that filled these rooms was the slickly produced, high-budget drama and comedy from south of the border. The choice was not if one would watch an American show, but which one. Streaming services with their vast and ever-growing libraries of U.S. content had become the central heart of the modern home. Their interfaces were the gateways to entertainment, their algorithms shaping the cultural conversation, the water cooler talk at the office, the chatter on social media. It all revolved around the latest plot twists and character arcs crafted in Hollywood. Canadian actors and writers often had to move south to find success, their talents absorbed into the great, insatiable machine of American production. The nation was a vast and profitable audience for stories that were not its own. But a silence began to grow in those living rooms. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of that specific familiar cadence. Subscriptions, once automatically renewed, were cancelled. The endless scroll through American-dominated menus came to a halt. The decision was often a quiet one, made by a family on a couch, a couple in bed, an individual with a tablet. It was a conscious choice to turn the dial to seek out a different frequency. What they found was a burgeoning world of Canadian storytelling. Revitalized national broadcasters and new domestic streaming platforms began to fill the void. They offered series set in the gritty streets of Hamilton, the vast landscapes of the North, the quirky neighborhoods of Montreal. They told stories about Canadian history, Canadian families, Canadian struggles and triumphs. The production values were often leaner, the stars less globally famous, but the stories resonated with a powerful authenticity. Now, the evening ritual has been transformed. The cultural conversation has shifted. People gather to discuss the fate of characters in a drama set on a Newfoundland fishing trawler or a comedy about life in a Toronto condo. The quiet in the living rooms was not the end of entertainment, but the beginning of a new chapter. It was the sound of a nation finally tuning into its own voice and finding that it had a great deal to say. The snack aisle of any Canadian grocery store was once a festival of artificial colors and bold, familiar packaging. It was a landscape dominated by American giants. Potato chips with impossibly complex lab-created flavors, cheese-dusted puffs that stained the fingers orange, chocolate bars with names known the world over. These were the guilty pleasures, the lunchbox staples, the fuel for road trips and movie nights. Their presence was overwhelming, a testament to the power of mass production and marketing. These snacks were a cornerstone of a shared North American food culture. The recipes were perfected for mass appeal, the ingredients sourced for maximum efficiency, the branding honed over decades of market research. Canadian palates were trained from childhood to crave these specific combinations of salt, sugar and fat. To challenge their dominance seemed not just difficult but almost unthinkable. They were simply what snacks. But, a quiet rebellion was taking place in the shopping cart. A shopper might pause, looking past the wall of familiar orange and red bags to a smaller display of kettle-cooked chips from Prince Edward Island. Another might skip the famous peanut butter cups in favor of a chocolate bar made with fair trade cocoa and maple sugar from a Quebec chocolatier. These were not grand political statements, but small deliberate acts of culinary curiosity. The grocery aisles began to reflect this change. The shelf space dedicated to the American mega brands started to contract. In the newly opened territory, a diverse range of local products appeared. Ketchup-flavored chips, a uniquely Canadian obsession, were joined by new varieties celebrating regional tastes. Dill pickle from the prairies, lobster-flavored crisp from the Maritimes, all dressed from everywhere. The snack aisle became a map of the nation's flavors. The result is a profound change in the nation's snacking habits. The lunchboxes packed by parents now contain granola bars made with Canadian oats and dried berries. The bowl on the coffee table during the hockey game is more likely to hold locally made pretzels than American corn chips. The taste of a guilty pleasure is no longer a standardized, imported flavor, but one that is surprisingly, refreshingly, the taste of home. The skies above Canada, a vast and endless blue, were once crisscrossed by the flight paths of giants. The familiar liveries of American Airlines were a constant sight at every major airport. From the bustling terminals of Toronto Pearson to the international gates at Vancouver, these carriers were the primary conduits connecting Canada to the United States and, through their extensive networks, to the rest of the world. They dominated the lucrative cross-border routes, their scale and reach seemingly unassailable. For Canadian travelers, flying an American airline was often the default choice. It meant access to a staggering number of destinations, competitive pricing driven by immense economies of scale, and participation in vast global loyalty programs. The flight crews were professional, the aircraft modern, but the experience was distinctly American. From the safety videos to the selection of in-flight magazines and snacks, it was a small but constant reminder of the junior role Canadian aviation played on its own continent. Then, a change in the air traffic patterns began to be noticed. The departure boards, once a sea of American logos, started to show a growing number of maple leaves and stylized northern geese. Fewer gates were occupied by the jets of Delta, United, and American. The skies did not empty, but the traffic within them shifted. The change was a direct result of choices made not in the air, but on the ground, in the booking decisions of millions of travelers. Canadian carriers, both established and new, rose to meet the new demand. They expanded their fleets, added new cross-border and international routes, and aggressively competed on price and service. They offered a travel experience that was subtly but meaningfully different. The welcome aboard was in 2 official languages. The menu featured Canadian wines and cheeses. The loyalty points could be redeemed for a trip to Fogo Island instead of Florida. It was a journey that felt like coming home, even before the plane had landed. Now the skies tell a story of self-reliance. While American carriers still fly north, their presence is diminished, their dominance broken. Canadian Airlines now command the airspace over their own territory, with a newfound confidence. The roar of the jet engines taking off from Canadian runways is the sound of a nation charting its own course, not just on the ground, but at 30,000 feet taking flight in its own name. The roar of the crowd, the crack of the bat, the swish of the net. For decades, these sounds in Canada were often in service of a foreign allegiance. While hockey remained fiercely the nation's own, in many other sports, Canadians were largely spectators to American leagues. The passions of summer were directed at Major League Baseball teams from Boston or New York. The drama of autumn Sundays belonged to the NFL. The high-flying spectacle of basketball was, for a long time, an imported dream from the NBA. The nation's top athletic talents were siphoned south, their careers playing out in American cities, their triumphs celebrated as a footnote in another country's sporting narrative. Canadian sports fans were loyal and knowledgeable, but their loyalty was often directed across the border. The television schedules, the sports bars, the merchandise stores, all were dominated by the logos and colors of U.S. franchises. It was a deeply ingrained part of the cultural landscape. But the dynamic began to shift. It started in the living rooms, with a click of the remote, away from an American broadcast to a Canadian game. It grew in the stadiums, where attendance for domestic leagues began to swell. The focus narrowed, turning from the sprawling, continent-wide leagues to the teams that played here in Canadian cities for Canadian fans. The Canadian Football League, with its unique rules and rich history, experienced a renaissance. New professional leagues in sports like basketball and soccer, founded and funded within Canada, began to gain serious traction. They provided a stage for homegrown talent to shine in front of hometown crowds. The allegiance of young fans, once pledged to distant superstars, was now given to the heroes they could see play down the street. The tribal colors worn on game day were no longer those of Chicago or Los Angeles, but of Calgary, Winnipeg, and Halifax. The stadiums now vibrate with a different energy. The chants are for local heroes. The rivalries are between Canadian cities. While the great American leagues are still followed, they no longer command the nation's undivided attention. The sporting passion of Canadians has been repatriated. The roar of the crowd is now, more than ever, the sound of a nation cheering for itself, celebrating its own victories on its own fields of play. The home is a sanctuary, a private world filled with the objects of our daily lives. For as long as anyone could remember, that world was largely furnished by American ingenuity and industrial scale. The laundry detergent under the sink, the cleaning sprays on the counter, the toothpaste by the basin, the recognizable brand of paper towels. These were the unsung, ubiquitous products that formed the foundation of the modern Canadian household. They were trusted, reliable, and ever-present. Their dominance was built on decades of advertising, creating a powerful sense of familiarity and trust. Jingles from television commercials became part of the cultural lexicon. The logos and packaging were as recognizable as the faces of family members. To walk through a home was to take a tour of the greatest hits of American consumer product corporations. The choices were made on autopilot, a habit passed down through generations. But even in the most mundane corners of life, a change was underway. It was a slow, deliberate rethinking of the everyday. It happened in the cleaning aisle, as a shopper reached for a bottle of eco-friendly cleaner from a BC company instead of the familiar chemical giant. It happened in the pharmacy, as someone chose a toothpaste made with natural ingredients from a brand based in Ontario. It was a quiet revolution of the shopping list. This shift was driven by a desire for products with a smaller environmental footprint, with simpler, more transparent ingredients, and with a connection to the local economy. Small Canadian companies, often started in a kitchen or a garage, found a receptive market. They couldn't compete on advertising budgets, but they could compete on quality. on values, and on the power of a local story. The household, it turned out, was the final frontier of this quiet boycott, and so the quiet transformation of the home was completed. The scent of the laundry room is no longer a focus-grouped chemical fragrance, but the subtle aroma of lavender from a Quebec farm. The tools we use to build and maintain our sanctuaries are no longer anonymous imports, but products with a name, a place, and a purpose that feels closer to home. The very atoms of daily life have been rearranged, reflecting a nation that has rebuilt its world from the inside out. What we have witnessed is not an ending, but a profound transformation. In the quiet solitude of its vast wilderness and the bustling heart of its cities, this nation has demonstrated a remarkable capacity for change. It is a story written not in headlines, but in the countless individual choices that, when woven together, create a new national fabric. The landscape, once a passive reflection of a powerful neighbor, now mirrors a distinct and confident identity, forged in the quiet resolve of its people. This journey has revealed a deep and abiding resilience. It is the resilience of a community that chooses to support its own, of an economy that learns to nurture its own innovations, and of a culture that finds its strongest voice when it speaks with authenticity. The bonds that tie this country together, from the rocky shores of the East to the Pacific coast, have been tested and have emerged stronger, reinforced by a shared sense of purpose and a renewed appreciation for the things that make this place unique. As the northern lights dance across the silent, star-filled sky, and the sound of the wind carries across the land, there is a sense of enduring strength. The story of this quiet unraveling is, in the end, a story of unity. It is a testament to the fact that a nation's character is not defined by what it consumes, but by what it creates, what it values, and what it chooses to be. The future of this land is being built, piece by piece, by the hands of its own people.